Thanks, Larry. Thanks, everybody, for having me. I am so delighted to be here with Southwest Writers. You guys are legend. Everybody knows about you. When I was a fledgling writer up in Nebraska, and I would go to the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Conference every year, I used to send off my manuscripts with hope to Southwest Writers Conference, or the contest, and every year I would get these really great critiques back. It was a wonderful thing, and one year I finally made it to the finals of the Southwest Writers Conference, or contest, and that was the year you guys quit having your conference. I didn't get to go. But it is legend, and the critiques I got back from this group were fabulous, and I remember one very specifically. I had a scene where my main character was pulling a calf, and she had the chains, and the calf came, popping out of the back of the cow, and cracked its knees on the barn floor. And the woman, or maybe it wasn't a woman, but I'm assuming it was, that judged my manuscript said, "Calves don't have knees." So I waited like 25 years to tell you, calves have knees. So I thank you so much for having me come here. Who's all doing NaNoWriMo? Yay! I love NaNoWriMo. It's something that I use many of the principles in my life, and when I write a first draft, I use the NaNoWriMo. It hardly ever works that it's in November though, so I use ShannonWriMo, and I go through 100 miles an hour from start to finish. So congratulations on doing that, and good luck. So who here loves to write? Right? Every day? All the time? It always feels good? Has anyone ever quit? I quit. I quit like my sister quits smoking, with about as much effect. She's still lighting up and I'm still writing. But so as Larry said, this year, just 2 months ago, released the first book in the Kate Fox Mystery Series. And it came out with Tor Forge, which is an imprint of Macmillan, so Big 5 publisher, yay! And I can say that here because you guys are my people, you guys are my tribe, and you know what the Big 5 means, and you know how much work it takes to get in there. So I'm here to tell you, keep at it. It can happen, and it will. Larry said that this book was the Kate Baer mystery series, which it started out being. It was Kate Baer, B-A-E-R, and I was so great because I hate titles. I'm so bad at titles. And a critique partner of mine said, "Why don't you name your character Kate Baer?" And that way she could have, the first book was Stripped Bare, the next book was Barely There, Bare Essentials. I had going forward forever, and my editor at Forge loved it, and it was all great, and they sent it to the marketing people, and the marketing people said, "Oh, no, we don't want this strange spelling of this name, and it's too cute of a naming device for the book we have planned, because it's not going to be a cute book." And they said that, and then they gave me this cover, but whatever, it's a beautiful cover, I'm happy with. So I could either change the title from Stripped Bare to something else, or I could change the name of my character, and my editor chose for me, and she changed the name of my character. So she's Kate Fox. It took me a little while to get used to that, but that's who we've got. So, and before this came out, I had a 3-book deal with Midnight Ink, which is a medium-sized press in Minnesota. They're a division of Llewellyn, and that also was a mystery series. And that was fun. And right before that was published, my very first book was published, Ashes of the Red Heifer, and it was published with what I call a nano press, L&L Dreamspell out of Texas, and they are no longer in business, and that book is no longer in print, which probably is a favor to the world. It was not ready for prime time. So I had a dry spell. I had a really long dry spell. The first book that I completed, not the first book that I started, but the first book I completed, if it was a child, it could drink and smoke in any state, and in fact probably would have, you know, a mortgage and kids in soccer. I've been at this a really long time, and it took me a long time to find some little bit of success. Unlike a lot of writers that I know, I never grew up wanting to be a writer. I didn't have that, I'm going to be a writer someday. I didn't think it was possible. I just didn't know, but I always read. And in fact, I probably read before I was even born because my mom read to my older brother and sister. And so books have always been a part of my life. I just never thought that I would actually write one. But when I was in 6th grade, I wrote a poem. And it was a really great poem. Now remember, this is in the 70s. So this poem was all about beauty and innocence, and how we all have to come together and love each other, and how pollution is bad. And, you know, it was the 70s, it was really great. And I had a friend in 6th grade who put that poem to music and played it on the dulcimer, because 70s again, right? So we hit the big time. We performed this at an assembly and got lots of accolades, and this was big time. And my sister finally found out about it, my older sister, and I don't know if any of you have older sisters, but you might, know what this is like. She read the poem and accused me of plagiarizing from her because nobody was writing about love and coming together in the 70s. So anyway, she told me that she was the writer in the family, and I had to find something else to do. And I was a little sister, I thought, fine, that's fine, I'll just go do something else. Never thought about being a writer. Went to college, and a college instructor, an English professor, sat me down and said, I think you ought to change majors from business and into English because you have a real facility for the language, which, I paid absolutely no attention to him, although I can remember word for word exactly what he said. Real facility for the language. So I didn't write, but I came out of college with a brand new business degree, raring to go, and did this really stupid thing that young girls can do sometimes. I fell in love, and I moved out into the middle of the Nebraska Sandhills, and where I lived for 20 years. And I raised kids out there, and if any of you have done this, you know how the writing just goes out of your mind. You're raising kids, you're trying to keep all the balls in the air, and everything's great. But I had something driving me, and I don't even know what it was, and I started to write. And I started to write articles for the newspaper and regional papers. I did a humor column, for a couple of years, and just kind of kept this going. I found Rocky Mountain fiction writers and thought maybe I might want to write a novel someday. And I kept working away, and my mother-in-law, bless her heart, and I mean that in the Southern sense, very kindly told me what my priorities were. She laid it all out for me. They were, number 1, her grandkids, number 2, her son, and number 3, the family business. And that was really, really motivating for me. I started writing a lot after that. So anyway, how did I keep going? SouthWest Writers, I won that finaled in that contest. Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, I won a couple of those. I even had an agent, a New York agent, and she took me on, and I was so excited. And about 2 weeks after I signed the contract, she sent me a letter, snail mail, she sent me a letter saying she had decided to give up repping fiction writers. And I am not taking credit for that. My book was not that bad. But, so what kept me going after all these years, decades of rejections? And I piled up rejections. I have hundreds and hundreds of them. And I can only tell you what works for me. And my one rule for writing, and it's a rule I have for life, is that you can't win if you don't play. So, we all know that publishing, and when I say publishing, for me it was with, traditional publishing. But when I say publishing a novel or something like that, indie pubbing is good, and I think it's great. And I'm going to say you're successful when you can sell a couple thousand books. You know, I think that's like boom. So when I'm saying published, I'm including indie pub people that can do that amazing feat, which is an amazing feat, unless you know 2,000 of your relatives. So, and the odds are not ever in our favor as writers to be published and published well. You know, it's a small group that gets to rise to the top, and I knew that. I always knew that. But I knew that the odds would go way, way down if I quit writing. And the other thing is I don't needlepoint, so I might as well write. Keep going. Something I find really helpful and always have is goal setting. If you're going to be in the game for a long time, set some goals. Know why you're writing. If you're writing because you want to create beautiful words and wonderful stories, and you don't care if you ever get published and that's not a goal of yours, know that, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. If your goal is to be published, know that that's what you're working for. Because you need to have that long-term goal out there so you know why you're doing it and what you're heading for. I caution somebody to have a long-term goal that is really specific, like I want to be published by St. Martin's by December 31st, 2017. That's a little too specific because there's so many things you can't control. But for me, that long-term goal that's out there, I want to be published, that was my goal. Then you have a midterm goal. And then you have your short-term goal, which is your specific tasks that you're going to do every day, every week to get you to that. So if your goal, for instance, for me, it was to be published. And my medium-term goal was to get good enough to get published. And a little bit more specific, to have a manuscript done in 6 months or a year or whatever. And my daily goal then becomes write 2,000 words a day, or whatever it is that's going to get you to that point. If you're working full-time and you can't do 2,000 words a day, because that's a lot, you know, write 1,000 words a day, or write 6 hours a week, or something very specific and quantifiable for your short-term goals. That'll get you there. It's really important to do that. Another thing that has kept me in the game for a really long time is relationships. When I started writing out in the middle of the Nebraska Sandhills, I didn't know any other writers, and it was hard. Nobody quite figured out what I was doing and why I was doing it, and if a rejection letter I got said, this is really close, send me something else, how much that's a success. You know, no one understands that except another writer. And so when I joined Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers and I started to make these friends, I made some really great friends. The first conference I went to, I met 3 other women from the Boulder area that graciously invited me to join their critique group. This was 20 plus years ago, and this is when we were mailing our manuscripts, you know, in envelopes and writing on them and sending them back. And these women are still my best friends to this day. And we've shared everything from writing success and failures to divorces, and you know, your kid turned out to be gay and you didn't know it. We've shared a lot of really interesting things through the years. And there are a couple times that I quit writing. A couple times I quit. And what always brought me back was the relationship with these people. I just didn't want to lose that in my life. And I knew if I didn't have that thread that kept us together, I would eventually lose track of these people. And as I've been writing longer, and now, you know, I've gone to some national conventions and conferences, I have friends all over the country. And if I quit writing, I might quit being friends with them, and that would be really hard for me. So if you want to be in this for the long term, make some good, strong friends to help pull you through, because we need our tribe to beat the drum for us when we can't beat it ourselves. So how did I keep going when the creativity is not there? You know, I don't really believe in writer's block, but there are times when it's just hard. The ideas aren't there, and you know they're just outside your grasp. So what I have always done, and I started this a billion years ago, and probably you guys will, a lot of you guys have been there with me. I read Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And I picked up this idea of morning pages, and I might actually have gotten a little bit from Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. Both of these are really old books, and they're classics, so if you're going to be a writer. And I've morphed it, and I can't remember which piece I got from whom, but I've morphed it into this, and I call it morning pages. And when I can't think of what's going to happen in my story, and I just can't figure out what's going on, I should do this every day, and I don't. But I do what I call morning pages, and I take a notebook. It's got to be college ruled, so it's little. And I have to write 3 full pages without picking up my pen, without stopping to think, ever. Even if I'm writing, I don't know what I'm going to write. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm sitting here, and it's, I usually do it in the morning, and but a lot of times what I'll do is either engage my main character or write from my main character's point of view. So if I'm writing from Kate, she might say to me, I don't know what you did. You got me in this stupid situation I would never be in. If you knew who I was, and you should because you've been writing about me for 2 years, you should know that I would never do this. And I can write 5 pages of that, and for some reason, somewhere in that, something breaks loose, and Kate will tell me what I need to do. She'll tell me where she should have been and why and how to get back out of there. So it's really crazy. I know it's crazy, but you guys are all writers and you're beating my drum, right? So you get this? Yeah. So that's, I have done a solid week of just writing morning pages in my character's voice, my character's point of view, or maybe I'll flip it and write from another character's point of view in the book. But that's always been very helpful for me. Something that I have also done that's kind of kept me going is knowing what comes next. Now I'm a plotter, and I know not everybody's a plotter, but this is what works for me. As each successive book comes along, I plot less and less. I used to plot on an Excel spreadsheet with all the different columns, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. Now I don't plot that extensively anymore because I know everything is going to change anyway. But I'll before I even sit down to write, I'll have my plot points. I know, the midpoint reversal. I know who killed him. I write mysteries, so I know who killed him. What happened, basically. I don't have to stick with that. I can change my villain. I can change anything in it. But if I know I have an idea and a good place to go, it calms me down and I can write. Now, last week I heard Hank Phillippi Ryan speak, and she's a New York Times best-selling mystery writer. She's written 7 books, I think, and really, really successful. And she says she never knows who did it. She doesn't want to know who did it because she wants to be surprised, and if she's surprised, readers are going to be surprised. So her idea is just to keep going, and the story will come. That would make me crazy because I'm a little OCD, but if it works for you, it works. But as far as knowing what comes next, when I get done with my day of writing, I'll stop for 5 or 10 minutes and think about what I'm going to write tomorrow. Think it through, what needs to happen, and I'll make a bullet point list by my desk, and then I know what I'm going to do when I sit down tomorrow. And that works for me on a couple of different levels. On one hand, those thoughts are going to churn in my brain until I get back to my computer tomorrow. And so while I'm doing dishes or walking the dog, these thoughts are going through and forming, and images are coming, and that's very, very helpful. I think my subconscious works a little bit at night too. But it works on another level, which is something I have problems with, and I'm sure no one else does, but that resistance. When you get up in the morning and the last thing you want to do is go sit at your computer, and if I don't know what I'm going to write, it's so much easier for me to go do the laundry, and I'll think about what I'm going to write while I'm doing the laundry because I don't really know what I'm going to do. I'm not excited to get in there. So that works for me on that level, which is really great. It worked really super well for me when I was working full-time. and I just didn't have the time to sit and mull things over at my desk. So I could hit the ground running at my next session. Boom, I'm down at my desk, I read my bullet points, and I go, oh yeah. I have a friend, Terry Shanes. She writes the Samuel Craddock mystery series. And this is really crazy, when she gets done writing at the end of a writing session, she stops mid-sentence. And she says then when she gets back to her desk, she reads that sentence and she's immediately thrown into her book. That would immediately throw me into the loony bin. I couldn't do that. But if it works for you, do that. That's another idea. So writing is hard, and sometimes things just don't work out. And so one thing that I think saved my writing life was accountability. So you know, I talked about this critique group I have with these three other women that live up in Boulder, Colorado. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was living in Flagstaff, and they were up in Boulder, and we were all just kind of ground to a halt. We had very little progress. Nobody had published anything for a long time or had any great success. We were just kind of circling the drain, writing-wise. And we had this discussion. We thought, why are we beating ourselves up? You know, we're either going to get in it or we're going to get out of it. You know, recommit or just quit the whole thing altogether. And we thought the best way to do this, to recommit, would be for each of us to just email our word count every day. And that's what we started to do. Now, there was no recriminations, there was no judging, there was no, wrist slapping or getting on each other, because we're adults, right? And we all have our own path, and we all have our own thing to do, and it's okay. But writing that down every day and sending that out and telling somebody, I wrote 500 words, that looked bad, and I made me feel bad, and so the next day I wrote 600 words or whatever. In very short time, my word count just grew, and that's when I wrote the first Nora Abbott book, and that was the first book that I feel like I published well. So accountability. Find some people that are in this with you, and just send it together, or do it yourself. Write yourself an email that says, I wrote this many words today. And I know, I don't know, this is all geared to novel writing, which is, a words game. This is how much can we get done? So I don't know how poets gauge their time and children's books. You're not writing 80,000 word books, so I don't know, but you have ways that you can gauge yourself and put your short-term goals. So another thing that can keep you going is exactly what you guys are doing here, which is gather together, go to workshops, go to conferences, join a writers group. I'm in Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime, as well as Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. This is where we get together and get our inspiration, and with people that understand and know how hard it is. It is hard, but there's joy in it. But it's a give and take. So you get together and you see that person that you've known forever that's been struggling with a book for 10 or 15 years, and they publish. They hit the big time. They get published with the big 5. And of course you're jealous, but you also know that it can happen. And it happened to them, it can happen to you. Your friend that published 6 indie books, and the 7th one hits it big, and now she's selling her backlist. And she's going to Hawaii because she earned enough to do that. Yay! She did it. You can do it. So get together with your group. Plus, when you're doing this and you're going to workshops, and I see you've got some great stuff coming up, you learn your craft and you improve and you get better and you get better. I never go to a workshop that I don't get something out of it. I can hear something 5 times and it doesn't make sense. The 6th time I hear it, the world opens up. It's like, oh, now I know what they mean by point of view. Duh. So, yeah. So go to conferences, get together. Okay, now here's where I'm going to get down to the brass tacks. I don't know if all of you are as easily fooled as I am. I can trick myself into doing all kinds of things. I'm very gullible and easy to fool. So I have some games I play. And the first one, I'm an accountant by trade. I got a weird dichotomy going on in my brain, and I like things that add up. And I like to know when things are balanced. You have a balance sheet, you're done. The assets equal the liabilities. You're done. Cha-ching! With writing, you're never done. You're never done. It's so scary. It's so awful, especially when you're OCD. So I have word count. That's what I do. I know when I'm working on a draft, I write 2,000 words a day. They don't have to be good words. In fact, most of the time they're not. They just have to be down. 2,000 words, and I can't quit until I hit 2,000 words. It's kind of like, I never did this because I'm smarter than this, but it's like if you take your kid and you tell them they can't get up from the table till they eat all their green beans, and the green beans get cold and icky and awful, and it gets harder and harder and harder to eat those green beans. That's how I am with my 2,000 words, man. I want to get them done while they're hot. Then I can get to go play. So word count works really well for me. When I was working full-time, I timed myself. I never read what came before. I just sat down because I only had an hour. I'd get up at 4:30, I wrote to 5:30, and then I would go extra. I was crazy. But an hour, and I better be productive in that hour if you're going to do it that way. I do like the NaNoWriMo. I start from page 1 and I just gallop as hard as I can till I hit the end. Because as Nora Roberts says, and we all know, you can fix anything but a blank page. And I truly, truly believe that. I also don't go back and fix things while I'm on the path through there, but I make lots of notes. Because if I hit chapter 7 and I realize that something should have been different in chapter 2, I just write a note, because I might hit chapter 17 and realize the fix that I made for chapter 2, I've got a better idea. So why waste time going back until I get all the way to the end, and then I know how to put it. My first drafts are a hot mess. Nobody can read them. If I die, my husband knows that he's to burn them all. But that's the way I do it. It's a game. I have another game I play with myself. There are days when I just can't force myself to the computer. It's just painful. It's hard. I don't want to do it. I'd rather do anything else. And those are my 750 word days. I give myself 1 or 2 750 word days a day, and I write 7 days a week. So those are my weekends. 750 words. I figure a trained monkey can write 750 words, right? I can just sit down, pound it out. Again, they don't have to be good words. So you think 750 is arbitrary? It isn't. I came up with this. I'm so brilliant. I heard James Lee Burke speak one day, and he said he writes 750 words a day. That's all he writes. When he gets up in the morning, he sits down, he reads the 750 words that he wrote yesterday, he writes 750, and he's done for the day. And he says in that really sexy Southern drawl, he says, I'm not going to do it, but he says, if you write 750 words a day, you have a book at the end of the year. So 750 words, that's a game I can play. But here's something, how it really works for me, even better, is that I tell myself I can do my 750 words and then I can binge watch The Good Wife all afternoon. So I sit down and I write my 750 words, and I'm down at my desk and I've written 750 words. Why don't I just finish the 1250 and save my 750 day for another day? I'm so easily fooled. And so that's what I generally end up doing. If I can get myself in my chair for no matter what kind of game I play, I'll probably finish my 2,000 words. Okay, now here's another game, and I've never actually played this one, but I know it works. It's called the 100 for 100. And it's 100 for 100. This comes to me from my friend Amy Hicks. And Amy just announced last week that she just got her first 3-book deal with Midnight Ink, so it works. And Amy took this from Joelle Charbonneau. See how the tribe works? Who is a YA writer, and very, very prolific YA writer. And when she gives workshops for young people, she encourages them to do 100 for 100, which is write 100 words a day for 100 days. And if you miss a day, you have to start over from scratch until you can write 100 words a day for 100 consecutive days. And I'm not sure if that's just getting the young kids in the habit of writing or what, but this is what Amy did. And Amy was working for the Justice Department in a real, stressful job. So what she did is she wrote 100 words a day for 100 days. And then she wrote 200 words a day for the next 100 days. And then she wrote 300 words a day for the next 100 days. And then 365 words a day for the last 65 days. So that's 1 year. She wrote 100 words for 100 days, 200 words for the next 100 days, 300, and then 365. At the end of that time, she says she wrote a draft of one book and 40% of another book. So at most, she was writing 365 words a day. And that's an email. You could do that. And then you'll end up with a draft and a half. That totally works. So the other game that I play with myself to keep writing, and I've done this a lot, is when things are too much. And we're really involved in craft, and we know that to put together a novel, you have to know a lot of different things. You have to know that you need a midpoint reversal. You have to have a plot point at the quarter mark and at the 3/4 mark, and that your hero has to save the day. No one can save your hero, and that you use show don't tell and active voice versus passive voice, and the rules just keep piling up, and pretty soon you're just sucked dry, and you can't write. At least maybe not you, but me. I take it back. And I call it tell myself a story. Just tell myself a story. It's something I've been doing my whole life. It's how I put myself to bed at night. I would always tell myself a story, and I would be the hero of some major adventure, and I was always gorgeous and smart, and everybody loved me, and it was great. It's how I spent hours and hours in the hayfield raking up hay in a tractor with no cab. Tell myself a story, and there are no rules. There are absolutely no rules, and I just write, and I make it. If I want to write a stupid romance scene, that's fine. If I want to write an adventure scene that even Dan Brown wouldn't believe, I can do that. I give myself permission, and I just write it because I want to find the joy. Because you can get sucked dry doing what you're supposed to do. Just find the joy in it, because that's why we're all here to begin with. If it quits being fun for long periods, it always quits being fun, but for really long periods, stop and just tell yourself a story, and guess what? You can fix it later. You can throw it all out. The old standard is that you need to write 1 million words before you're publishable. So just chalk that up to those, part of the 1 million words that you're going to write, and before you get to that point. But find the joy, because if that's gone, there's no point. So, and I was discussing with Sam something that I had forgotten about that helps me, and I use this all the time now. When I'm avoiding resistance, I talked about resistance and how we have to cut through that. What I will do is take myself to a coffee shop. I know it's so cliche, but if I sit at a coffee shop, if I'm at home and I can find 1 million different things to do, and I can get on Facebook and I can do my email, if I take myself to a coffee shop and I don't get online, a couple things happen. First, I don't want to be there forever, so I'm going to hurry up and get my words done. The other thing is I'm really self-conscious, and I don't want people looking at me, so I'm not going to get up and walk around. And I'm not going to look up from my computer in case they are looking at me. I don't want to know. So that is really helpful for me. I don't know if that'll work for you. Again, mind games. So I have a really good friend. I've known him for, 25 years or so. And his name is Curtis Craddock. And this is his story. I asked him about this, if he would write this up for me, and he did. So this is Kurt's story. He said, I started writing in 1985 while I was still in high school. I had one teacher who told me I had a knack for writing, and all I had to do to get an A in her writing class was start entering my stories in contests. So I did. I first got an honorable mention, and I was more or less hooked. I started writing longer works, and I took creative writing classes in college. Teachers kept telling me that I was good at what I was doing. I had a feel for the language and story. I wrote my first novel-length manuscript, which I think clocked in at around 500,000 words, literally. And then I wrote my second, slightly less verbose piece, which I decided to submit for publishing. Of course, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and I promptly made every mistake possible in publishing. I have never been so good at anything as I was at failing that process. The first big mistake I made was paying a bogus literary representative for a fair portion of my life savings to represent the work. Pro tip, never give an agent money. Needless to say, my money and my manuscript both disappeared without a trace. I felt like an idiot, basically because I was an idiot. I wrote a third novel. Looking back, this really was the first story of mine that was worth the paper it was printed on, and it was printed because it was still the early days of personal computer industry, and the publishing industry still insisted on everything in paper. I entered this manuscript in contests, hoping to gain the attention of an editor that way. I did not gain the attention of an editor that way, though I did become very good at winning contests, which gave me hope. I was about 6 years into the game when I, attended the SouthWest Writers Workshop's annual conference, where I met an agent who wanted to represent me. So I signed an agency agreement, sent her novel number 3, and got to work on novel number 4, while I waited and waited and waited. After about a year, I found out that this agent had closed up shop without telling anyone. I tore my hair out for a while and then decided to try to be my own agent, sending out query letters by the bucket load to New York publishing houses, small presses, and anything else that looked like a promising lead. This was still in the age before the internet really became a regular thing, so all the correspondence was done by mail. I then got what I thought was going to be my lucky break, when a query letter I sent to Bain came back asking me for the full manuscript. I sent in the full manuscript of book number 4 while writing book number 5, and waited, and waited, and waited. 2 years later, I got a message in the mail informing me that that editor had been interested in my book, had left the publishing house, and the new occupant of her office had found my manuscript in the bottom of her desk drawer, and thanks, but no thanks. There followed more years of writing more books with very little to show for it, until finally, in 1999, I got an offer from a small press in Denver to publish novel number 6, which was called Sparrow's Flight. I signed a contract in December, and the book came out in June of 2000. And that was it. I'd finally gotten published. Except it wasn't. The small press probably went bankrupt. Then followed a few more dry years when I couldn't get any sort of nibble at all. By this point, I think that the fact of being a writer was burned into me. There were days and even weeks that when I didn't write, but I always got back to it. I stopped believing in publishing, but I never stopped writing. Reason suggested that 15, 17, 20 years of failure was a large enough sample size to logically conclude that whatever it took to be a writer, I just didn't have it. But I didn't stop. There comes a point when you have to love the work, regardless of the reward, and I was at that point. That is not to say I wasn't bitter about my lack of success in the field. I was bitter as black coffee, but that didn't stop me from wanting to make stories. I am in some ways unbelievably stubborn. I had set out when I was 17 to be a writer, and I was damn well going to keep trying. Also, by this time, I had a very good critique group, friends and colleagues who had faith in me. Alas, the waiting was not over. About 10 years ago, novel number 7 attracted the attention of a well-known and well-respected agent who wanted to represent it. So I signed yet another agency agreement and sent in the manuscript and began working on novel number 9. For about a year, the agent kept in contact with me, informing me of updates as we went along. But then his attention began to wane and his interests to shift away from publishing. Once again, I ended up getting myself stranded on the island of burned-out agents. By this point, my writing had slowed to a crawl. I was working full-time at a very stressful job, and the words were not coming easily as they once did. Of course, the new words were better than the old words, but that seemed poor consolation to me. So I limped along for another few years until 3 years ago, when I ended up sharing an unlikely breakfast with an editor from Tor. After an hour of chatting each other up, he asked to see my manuscript for a novel called An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors. It was by far the best work according to my critique group. I sent him the novel and tried to forget about it because by that point I realized that rejection was nature's favorite state. Much to my surprise, 2 months later he called me back and said he wanted to present my story to the board at Tor. I was amazed, I was thrilled. I was in for yet another disappointment as this editor promptly fell off the face of the earth. I tried for months to get hold of him, but he was completely unresponsive. I picked up my shattered pieces of my hope and put them in the drawer where I keep them right alongside my will and my antidepressants. I started writing another book. Then roughly a year after he'd made his initial offer, the editor called me back and asked if I was still interested. I hadn't had any luck in the intervening year, so I said yes. Story over, right? Not yet. Impediments kept evolving. My editor was forced to delay some of his projects in order to take over a big project from an editor who had a major medical event, which took another big chunk of time. Meanwhile, my well-respected agent had gone off the deep end, so I fired him and hired another well-respected agent who almost immediately had some major health issues of her own. At this point, I was nearly convinced that I was under some sort of curse, an evil magic so strong that it would kill or drive anyone mad who touched my work. Finally, at the end of 2014, I hired my current agent, who has kept on top of Tor for me. It only took her another year to bring them to the table with an offer for 3 books, which I finally signed on November 6, 2015. So endeth my 30-year career as an unpublished author. So, and Curtis's book is coming out next month, his first one. It's got a 3-book deal. So, you know, it can happen. Just persistence pays off. So, a friend of mine, Susan Spann, who writes a mystery series with ninjas in the 1500s in Japan, says that success is binary. 1 minute you're not, and the next minute you are. Which I put this down to, I had a pastor when I was in Nebraska, and I used to do some unskilled work for him. He was a carpenter. He would put me to work sanding things. And I would sand, and I would sand, and I would sand, and I would go, "Is it done?" And he would come look at it, and he would say, "Don't quit till you're done." So that's what I say about writing. Don't quit till you're done. Keep going. Another friend of mine, this is a quote that he gave me, and I love this. His name is Matthew Clemens. He says, "You have to learn to you have to learn how to be happy with the work, with the doing, with the having done, and not the outcome of the work. So write the book, even if it's never published. Then write another one, even if that one isn't published either, because it's in the doing that you find yourself." So that's the story of publishing. I thank you all for coming tonight. And I want to tell you that my book is for sale on the back table. It's $20. No pressure, it's only my career. Also, this book was Library Journal Pick of the Month in September when it came out, so that was kind of a good deal. I was excited. So, any questions?